Would there be less sexual abuse and assault if we lowered our expectations of monogamy? Hi, my name is Dr. Zhana, and today I'd like to answer a reader's question that was sent to me recently over email by someone who was wondering if there was some sort of connection between sexual assault and monogamy and non-monogamy. As they say, I know there's an element of power and entitlement that is a factor in these men behaving badly, referring to the Roy Moore and Al Franken, Trump, now Matt Lauer. But I wonder if our culture's obsession with monogamy plays into it as well. Do you think that if our culture tolerated or accepted non-monogamy, these incidents of abuse would be far less common? If it were more accepted to have multiple sexual partners even within the confines of marriage, would these incidents lessen, or perhaps I'm misunderstanding this entirely and it could be more about power manipulation over someone? This is a really, really interesting question. Unfortunately, we don't really have a lot of data to support or reject this hypothesis because there isn't much research on how much sexual assault has been perpetrated by people who are in monogamous versus non-monogamous relationship. We've had over the last 10 years or so a lot of research on monogamous versus non-monogamous relationships and people who are in these different types of relationships in terms of other outcomes, but mostly the research has focused on things like relationship satisfaction, love, passion, intimacy, jealousy, like those kinds of things. I'm not aware of any research that has asked people in monogamous versus non-monogamous relationships how often they perpetrated sexual assault, or if anybody ever asked the victims of sexual assault whether the person who was assaulting them was in a monogamous or a non-monogamous relationship, right? I don't think that would be the best way to get at it, but you certainly could ask people in the different types of relationships whether they've committed various types of sexual misconduct or assault or harassment, and then compare the results. So as I said, that we don't have. So how can we even begin to approach this question? I think there is some level of truth to that hypothesis. I think it's to some extent accurate. I think that, so there is this notion that sexual assault or abuse is always about power and manipulation and not about sexual desire. And that is a hypothesis that has been put forward by various feminist kind of scholars and thinkers. But research, actual psychological research, does not seem to support it. In reality, a sexual desire component is an important component of sexual assault and abuse. So these people are horny, they want to have sex, they want the sexual pleasure when they go out and assault or abuse other people. It's not just because, it's not the primary motive, very often is not because they want to manipulate and overpower. Now, you certainly do need elements of misogyny or low empathy or a sense of entitlement or a sense that these women usually because in most cases it's women who are the victims of sexual assault, with men being the perpetrators. So there's a sense of these women or whatever, these people of and whatever gender that are being that the person is assaulting are lesser human beings or deserve fewer rights. So you do need a host of these other personality traits and beliefs and attitudes in order to make it possible to express your sexual desire in this inappropriate way. But most of the time, there is a strong sexual desire that is the part of the driving motivation behind sexual assault. And so I think that restricting people to only have one partner or restricting people to only have sex in these very confined boxes of only if you are in a long-term loving relationship with somebody and maybe even in marriage, and there's no other way that you can be sexual in a way that's acceptable and legal and moral and ethical and honest and all of that, then I think there are higher chances that repression that you're feeling from the outside world is going to get channeled in some of these inappropriate ways. And again, I think you definitely need these additional kinds of personality traits and values and attitudes, especially for the people who are predators in the sense that we think of these multiple kind of repeat offenders who are out there looking for the most vulnerable types of victims that they can go after. Right. And I think in those cases, probably monogamy versus non-monogamy is not going to make a huge difference. But I think for a lot of people's lives who are not really necessarily these kind of monsters who are out there to get the most vulnerable kind of victim, but instead are men who are finding themselves in kind of gray areas and unclear situations, who have a lot of guilt and shame around their sexual desires and the fact that they want other partners aside from their long-term girlfriends or wives, that it is likely that some of those are going to get expressed in this inappropriate way, or they're more likely to read signs poorly or to kind of assert themselves in situations that are inappropriate because they're not being given the right to do it in a way that is appropriate and it is acceptable. So I can't say to what extent having a greater expectation of non-monogamy would reduce sexual assault and abuse. But I think having a culture where non-monogamy is acceptable is an option, is something that people have the right to make a decision about in their own lives with each and every partner that they get together with, and they have the ability to find the type of relationship that works for them. Then what you would see is a lot of these people who have high sex drives and high need for sexual novelty and who want to be sexual with a lot of different people be able to express those sexual desires and sexual needs in ways that are appropriate and consensual and non-problematic to anybody around them, both their current long-term partners and any other short-term or other partners that they may have. So that's kind of what I have to say on this topic. I would love to see research on this. What we do know from research is that people in some of these communities that go to sex parties. So this is unpublished data as of yet, but we have been collecting, my colleague and I, Brooke Wells at Widener University, and I have collected data on people who go to sex parties, on like 1,700 people who've been to a sex party in the past year in the US. And what we found there is that how frequently sexual abuse or assault happens at some of these kinds of events where people have a more open-minded way of thinking about things and better communication skills is very low. Very, very, very few people reported some sort of sexual misbehaving on the part of others at these events. And then we went in and interviewed some of these people about their experiences, and the story that we hear over and over and over again is that they feel a lot more safe at these events than they do in like the regular world out there, that they feel much more likely to be groped non-consensually or hit on aggressively and inappropriately at just regular bars and clubs than they are to experience those kinds of unwanted sexual contact at places like sex parties, where there's a very clear distinction between what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, very strong emphasis on consent and the proper ways of ensuring consent for everybody involved. So I think a lot of those communities that promote non-monogamy at the same time promote strong sense of and emphasize consent. And so if people become part of these non-monogamous kind of worlds and communities and relationships, then they become much more aware of the issues around consent. But that's all we have now. I would love to see research that kind of surveys people who are in monogamous and non-monogamous relationships and are similar in terms of their political ideology or personality or so on, because it's a pretty good chance that people who select themselves into monogamy versus into non-monogamy are different in other ways. But if you can control for some of those differences and then compare rates of sexual perpetration of sexual assault, then that would be kind of the way to answer this question with clear data. All right, that's it from me right now. If you like, please subscribe, share, comment, provide feedback. Also support, you can support me through my Patreon account, and it's a great way to support the work that I do. And see you next time. Bye.